In the magnificent kingdom of Tithamor, nestled between towering mountains and endless seas, Prince Alexander discovered something that would change everything. The golden palace walls had witnessed many secrets, but none as disturbing as what he found that autumn evening. Princess Isabella, his 7-year-old daughter, had been acting strangely for weeks. She would whisper to her beloved teddy bear, "Mr. Buttons," and seemed frightened whenever certain people entered her chambers. Queen Evangeline, Alexander's stepmother, had married his father, King Edmund, 5 years ago after his mother's tragic death. At first, the kingdom celebrated the union, believing it would bring stability. Evangeline was beautiful, charming, and seemed genuinely caring toward Isabella. She would often visit the princess, bringing gifts and spending hours in her room, claiming to help with bedtime stories and royal etiquette lessons. But Alexander noticed changes in his daughter's behavior. Isabella, once vibrant and talkative, became withdrawn. She would flinch when Evangeline approached, and preferred staying in her room rather than playing in the royal gardens. The palace servants whispered among themselves, noting how the queen would emerge from Isabella's chambers with a peculiar expression, almost satisfied, as if she had accomplished something important. One evening, as Alexander tucked Isabella into bed, she clutched Mr. Buttons tightly and whispered, "Daddy, why does the queen always touch my teddy when you're not here? She says it's our special secret." The innocent words sent chills down Alexander's spine. Something was terribly wrong, and his protective instincts kicked in immediately. The next day, while Evangeline attended a royal council meeting, Alexander carefully examined Mr. Buttons. The teddy bear looked normal from the outside, with its soft brown fur and button eyes that Isabella loved so much. But as he felt around the seams, his fingers detected something unusual. There was a small, hard object hidden within the stuffing. With trembling hands, he carefully opened a small seam and discovered a tiny recording device, no bigger than a coin, expertly concealed inside the beloved toy. The discovery hit Alexander like a physical blow. Someone had been listening to his daughter's most private moments, recording her innocent conversations, her bedtime prayers, her fears and dreams. The violation felt monstrous. Who would do such a thing to a child? And why? His mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. The device was sophisticated, expensive, and professionally installed. This wasn't the work of a random intruder, but someone with access, resources, and a calculated plan. As Alexander held the tiny device, his hands shook with rage and disbelief. The kingdom he had sworn to protect, the palace that should have been the safest place for his daughter, had been compromised. Someone had violated the most sacred bond between a father and child, turning an innocent toy into a tool of surveillance. The implications were staggering. What had they heard? What were they planning to do with the recordings? And most terrifyingly, how long had this been going on? The prince's mind immediately turned to Evangeline. Her frequent visits to Isabella's room, her insistence on private time with his daughter, and her unusual behavior all suddenly made sense. But he needed to be certain before making any accusations. The stakes were too high, and the consequences of being wrong could destroy the kingdom's stability. He carefully replaced the device and sealed the seam, ensuring Mr. Buttons looked exactly as before. If Evangeline was responsible, she must not know that her secret had been discovered. That night, Alexander lay awake planning his next moves. He would need evidence, allies, and a strategy to protect Isabella while uncovering the truth. The palace suddenly felt like a fortress filled with enemies, rather than a home filled with family. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every friendly face could mask betrayal. The prince realized he was entering a dangerous game where his daughter's safety and the kingdom's future hung in the balance. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Alexander's shoulders as he considered the broader implications. If Evangeline was indeed behind the surveillance, what was her ultimate goal? Was she gathering information to use against Isabella in the future? Was someone else pulling the strings, using the queen as their agent? The questions multiplied, each one more troubling than the last, as Alexander prepared to uncover a conspiracy that would shake the very foundations of Ethermore. Prince Alexander spent sleepless nights planning his investigation while maintaining a facade of normalcy around Queen Evangeline. He knew that one wrong move could endanger Isabella further, or alert potential conspirators to his discovery. The palace, once a place of comfort and security, now felt like a maze of deception, where every conversation could be monitored and every action scrutinized. He began by discreetly reaching out to Captain Marcus Blackwood, the head of the Royal Guard and his most trusted friend since childhood. Marcus had served the royal family for 15 years with unwavering loyalty and had an impeccable reputation for discretion. Alexander arranged a private meeting in the old armory, a location he knew was secure and away from potential listening devices. When Alexander revealed the hidden camera in Mr. Button's, Marcus's weathered face darkened with anger. "Your Highness, this is beyond violation. It's an attack on the crown itself," Marcus declared, his voice barely controlled. The captain immediately understood the implications. If someone could place surveillance devices in the princess's private chambers, nowhere in the palace was truly safe. Together, they developed a careful plan to gather evidence without alerting the perpetrators. Marcus would conduct a security review of the entire palace under the guise of routine safety measures. This would allow them to search for additional surveillance devices while appearing to strengthen security rather than investigating a breach. Meanwhile, Alexander would carefully observe Evangeline's behavior and document any suspicious activities. The investigation revealed disturbing details. Marcus discovered 2 additional recording devices, one hidden in Isabella's dollhouse and another concealed within her jewelry box. The devices were all of the same professional grade, confirming this was not a random act but a coordinated surveillance operation. More troubling was the discovery that someone had been accessing Isabella's chambers regularly when the royal family was away on official duties. Alexander's surveillance of Evangeline revealed a pattern of behavior that confirmed his worst fears. She would visit Isabella's room at specific times, always when she believed she was unobserved. During these visits, she would spend time near the locations where the devices were hidden, sometimes appearing to adjust objects or check on something. Her demeanor during these moments was completely different from her public persona as the caring stepmother. The breakthrough came when Marcus intercepted a coded message intended for Evangeline. Through careful analysis, they discovered that someone outside the palace was receiving regular reports about Isabella's activities, conversations, and even her daily routine. The messages referenced the asset and discussed future implementation of the plan, suggesting that the surveillance was preparation for something more sinister. As Alexander delved deeper into Evangeline's background, disturbing facts emerged. Her previous marriage had ended when her wealthy husband died under mysterious circumstances, leaving her his entire fortune. There were whispers of insurance claims and convenient accidents that had never been properly investigated. Her arrival in Ethermore coincided with several other kingdoms experiencing internal conflicts and succession disputes. The prince realized they were dealing with something far more complex than simple palace intrigue. Evidence suggested that Evangeline was part of a larger network, possibly connected to foreign powers or criminal organizations seeking to destabilize kingdoms through manipulation of royal successions. Isabella, as the heir to the throne, was a prime target for such schemes. Marcus's investigation revealed that the surveillance equipment was manufactured in the neighboring kingdom of Valdris, a nation that had been showing increasing hostility toward Ethermore in recent years. Trade disputes and border tensions had escalated, and there were rumors of Valdris seeking to expand their territory through political manipulation rather than direct military action. The evidence pointed to a sophisticated operation designed to gather intelligence about Isabella that could later be used for blackmail, manipulation, or worse. The recordings of her innocent conversations could be edited and misused, or the detailed knowledge of her routines could facilitate kidnapping or assassination attempts. The scope of the threat was becoming clear, but the full extent of the conspiracy remained hidden. Alexander faced an agonizing decision. Confronting Evangeline directly could force her hand and potentially endanger Isabella, but allowing the surveillance to continue was equally unacceptable. He needed irrefutable proof of her involvement before taking action, but time was running out. The coded messages suggested that whatever plan was in motion would soon reach its implementation phase. The prince decided to set a trap. He would feed false information to Evangeline about Isabella's schedule and activities, then monitor how this information traveled through the surveillance network. If his suspicions were correct, the false information would eventually reach her handlers, proving her complicity in the scheme. Third part. The trap Alexander set worked with chilling efficiency. Within hours of sharing false information about Isabella's upcoming visit to the royal stables, coded messages began flowing from the palace to external contacts. Marcus intercepted communications revealing that Evangeline was indeed reporting regularly to handlers in Valdris, providing detailed intelligence about palace security, Isabella's routines, and the royal family's personal relationships. Armed with irrefutable evidence, Alexander knew he had to act swiftly. But Evangeline was not merely a spy. She was the Queen of Aethermore, married to his father, and any accusations against her would create a constitutional crisis. Worse, King Edmund had been showing signs of declining health recently, and stress from such revelations could prove dangerous for his already weak heart. Alexander decided to confront Evangeline privately before involving his father or the royal council. He arranged to meet her in the Queen's private study, a location he had confirmed was free of surveillance devices. The confrontation would be recorded by Marcus from an adjoining chamber, ensuring there would be evidence of whatever transpired. When Evangeline entered the study that evening, she appeared as composed and regal as always, her golden hair perfectly arranged and her emerald dress impeccable. Alexander waited until she was seated before placing the tiny recording device on the table between them. "I found this in my daughter's teddy bear," he said simply, watching her face for any reaction. For a moment, Evangeline's mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath her beautiful exterior. But she quickly recovered, adopting an expression of shock and concern. "How horrible! Who would do such a thing to dear Isabella? We must inform the guards immediately and find the person responsible for this violation." Alexander placed additional evidence on the table. Photographs of the other devices, copies of intercepted messages, and documentation of her suspicious activities. "The person responsible is sitting across from me," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "The only question is whether you're going to confess or force me to expose you publicly." The caring stepmother persona vanished, replaced by a woman who radiated danger and calculation. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Alexander," she said, her voice now carrying a subtle accent that revealed her true origins. "This is bigger than your little kingdom, bigger than your precious daughter's privacy." She stood and moved toward the window, but Alexander blocked her path. "You will not leave this room until you explain everything," he demanded. "Who are you working for? What is the ultimate goal? And what were you planning to do with the information you gathered about Isabella?" Evangeline laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Your father is a fool, and you're even more naive than I thought. Aethermore sits on the richest mineral deposits in this region, but your family is too weak and traditional to properly exploit them. Valdris has plans that extend far beyond your borders, and your daughter is simply a means to an end." The confession confirmed Alexander's worst fears. This was not merely about surveillance, but about a long-term plan to control Aethermore through manipulation of the royal succession. Isabella, as the future heir, was being studied and profiled so that she could eventually be controlled or eliminated depending on Valdris's needs. "The recordings were just the beginning," Evangeline continued, seeming to take pleasure in revealing the scope of the conspiracy. "We've been building a psychological profile of Isabella, understanding her fears, her loves, her weaknesses. When the time comes, she'll be easy to manipulate, or, if necessary, to discredit. A unstable future queen, perhaps one who suffers from delusions or mental illness, would be easily replaced by a more suitable ruler." The thought of his innocent daughter being systematically studied like a laboratory specimen, her childhood joy and trust weaponized against her, filled him with a fury he had never experienced. He grabbed Evangeline and slammed her against the wall, his hands at her throat. "You monster," he growled. "How dare you target a child for your political games?" But even as he held her there, Evangeline smiled. "Kill me, and you'll never know the full extent of the operation." She gasped. "There are others, Prince. Others you trust, others who have access to Isabella. Remove me, and you'll still be fighting shadows while your daughter remains in danger." The revelation that other conspirators existed within the palace forced Alexander to release her. If Evangeline was telling the truth, Eliminating her would only alert the remaining threats and possibly accelerate whatever timeline they were following. He needed to extract more information before deciding how to proceed. Evangeline straightened her dress and touched her throat where his hands had been. "You're learning, Prince. Politics requires patience and strategy, not the emotional outbursts of an angry father. Yes, there are others. Your beloved Marcus, perhaps? Or maybe the sweet nursemaid who tucks Isabella in each night? Trust is such a fragile thing in palaces." Alexander refused to believe that Marcus could be involved, but doubt crept into his mind. How had the surveillance devices been planted without inside help? Who else had regular access to Isabella's chambers? The web of deception was more complex than he had imagined, and every revelation made him question everything he thought he knew about the people closest to his family. The confrontation reached a stalemate. Evangeline had admitted her guilt but held information that Alexander desperately needed. She demanded safe passage out of the kingdom in exchange for revealing the identities of her co-conspirators and the full details of Valdris's plans. Alexander faced an impossible choice. Let a dangerous enemy escape or risk his daughter's safety by operating with incomplete information about the threats surrounding her. Fourth part. Evangeline's revelation about other conspirators within the palace meant that every person with access to Isabella was now suspect. The queen's offer to reveal their identities in exchange for safe passage created a moral and strategic dilemma that kept him awake for hours after their confrontation. Rather than immediately accepting or rejecting Evangeline's proposal, Alexander decided to use the time to conduct his own investigation. If other conspirators existed, there would be evidence of their activities. Working with Marcus, whom he still trusted, despite Evangeline's attempts to sow doubt, he began a systematic review of palace staff, their backgrounds, and their recent activities. The investigation revealed troubling patterns. Several staff members had received unexpected financial windfalls in recent months, including Isabella's nursemaid, Sarah, who had suddenly been able to send money to her sick mother in a distant village. The head of palace communications had been making unusual trips to nearby towns, claiming family obligations that didn't align with his known relatives. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Isabella's new tutor, hired just 3 months earlier, had falsified his credentials and references. As Alexander delved deeper into the conspiracy, he realized that Valdris had been planning this operation for years, carefully placing agents and recruiting insiders through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and ideological manipulation. The scope was breathtaking and demonstrated a level of patience and resources that made Valdris far more dangerous than anyone in Ethermore had realized. Meanwhile, Isabella's behavior became increasingly concerning. The sensitive child seemed to sense the tension in the palace, though she couldn't understand its source. She became more clingy with her father and showed signs of anxiety that broke Alexander's heart. The surveillance had clearly affected her on some subconscious level, creating an atmosphere of unease that she was too young to articulate but old enough to feel. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered a hidden communication system built into the palace's ancient architecture. Secret passages that had been used centuries ago for escape during sieges had been modified with modern communication equipment, allowing the conspirators to coordinate their activities without using conventional methods that could be easily intercepted. Through careful surveillance of these hidden channels, Alexander learned that the conspiracy's timeline had been accelerated. King Edmund's declining health had prompted Valdris to move faster than originally planned. If the king died while Isabella was still a minor, a regency would be required, creating opportunities for the conspirators to influence or eliminate potential rulers and install their preferred candidate. The most shocking revelation was that Evangeline had been slowly poisoning King Edmund with substances that mimicked the progression of natural illness. The king's recent health problems were not due to age or stress, but to a carefully administered toxin that would eventually prove fatal while appearing to be natural causes. This meant that Edmund was in immediate danger, and time was running out. Faced with this urgent threat, Alexander realized he could no longer afford to negotiate with Evangeline or wait for perfect information about all the conspirators. His father's life was at stake, and every day of delay brought the king closer to death. The prince had to act decisively, even if it meant operating with incomplete intelligence. Alexander decided to turn the tables on the conspiracy by feeding them false information about his own discoveries. He let it be known, through channels he suspected were compromised, that he was planning to take Isabella on an extended visit to their summer castle, far from the capital. This fictional trip was designed to flush out the conspirators and force them to accelerate their plans, hopefully making mistakes that would reveal their identities. The ruse worked perfectly. Within hours, suspicious activities erupted throughout the palace as the conspirators scrambled to adjust their plans to account for Isabella's supposed departure. Sarah, the nursemaid, was observed trying to access Isabella's chambers at unusual hours. The communications chief made urgent trips to send messages, and the false tutor began asking pointed questions about the princess's travel preferences and security arrangements. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Whitmore, the royal physician who had been treating King Edmund's mysterious illness, suddenly requested an urgent meeting with the Queen. Marcus observed this meeting from a hidden position and overheard enough to confirm that the doctor was part of the conspiracy and was being pressured to accelerate the poisoning timeline. Armed with this information, Alexander faced his most difficult decision yet. He now knew the identities of most conspirators and understood the immediate threat to his father's life. But making arrests would alert any remaining unknown conspirators and could prompt them to take desperate action against Isabella or other family members. The prince realized that he needed to orchestrate a simultaneous operation that would neutralize all known threats while protecting his family from any hidden dangers. This would require precise timing, absolute secrecy, and the kind of decisive action that would determine the fate of the kingdom. As Alexander prepared for the final confrontation, he reflected on how quickly his world had changed. A simple discovery in his daughter's teddy bear had revealed a conspiracy that threatened everything he held dear. The innocence of childhood had been violated, the sanctity of family corrupted, and the very foundations of the kingdom shaken. But through it all, his love for Isabella and his duty to protect her had given him the strength to face impossible choices and uncover terrible truths. Fifth part. The final phase of Alexander's plan required split-second timing and absolute precision. He had one opportunity to neutralize the conspiracy while saving his father's life and protecting Isabella from any remaining threats. The stakes could not have been higher, and failure would likely result in the destruction of everything he held dear. Alexander chose the night of the Harvest Moon Festival for his operation. The palace would be filled with guests, creating both cover for his actions and witnesses to ensure accountability. He had spent weeks coordinating with Marcus to identify every conspirator and plan simultaneous arrests that would prevent any of them from warning the others or taking desperate action. The operation began at midnight, when Marcus led a team of trusted guards to arrest Sarah, the compromised nursemaid, as she attempted to plant another surveillance device in Isabella's chambers. The arrest was swift and silent, preventing her from alerting other conspirators. Simultaneously, other teams moved against the communications chief and the false tutor, securing them before they could destroy evidence or send warning messages. The most delicate part of the operation involved Dr. Whitmore. Alexander personally confronted the physician in his private quarters, where a search revealed vials of the exotic poison that had been slowly killing King Edmund. The doctor's arrest provided the crucial evidence needed to begin treating the king's condition and hopefully reversing the damage that had been done. With the immediate conspirators secured, Alexander turned his attention to Evangeline. He found her in her private chambers, calmly packing as if she had anticipated this moment. "I wondered when you would finally act," she said without turning around. "Your father taught you well, but perhaps too well. A more ruthless ruler would have eliminated me days ago." Alexander had prepared for this confrontation carefully. "You're going to write a full confession," he told her, "detailing every aspect of the conspiracy, every person involved, and every plan that Valdris has for this kingdom. In exchange, I'll allow you to leave Ethermore alive, but you'll never be welcome in any civilized kingdom again." Evangeline laughed as she continued packing. "And if I refuse, will you torture a confession out of me? That doesn't seem like something the noble Prince Alexander would do." But when she turned to face him, she saw that he was not alone. Marcus stood behind him, and both men wore expressions of cold determination that made her realize her situation was more precarious than she had assumed. "You're right," Alexander replied. "I won't torture you. But you've committed treason against the crown, attempted murder of the king, and violated the innocence of a child. The traditional punishment for such crimes is public execution. and the people of Ethermore are quite angry about what you've done to their beloved princess." For the first time since Alexander had known her, Evangeline showed genuine fear. The thought of facing a crowd of angry subjects who had trusted and loved her was clearly more terrifying than any physical threat. She agreed to write the confession, providing details that revealed the full scope of Valdris's ambitions and their network of agents throughout the region. The confession revealed that Isabella had been specifically targeted because psychological analysis suggested she would be easy to manipulate as an adult ruler. The recordings were being used to create detailed profiles that would guide future manipulation strategies. If manipulation failed, the plan was to discredit her mentally when she came of age, creating justification for Valdris to intervene and install a more compliant ruler. As dawn broke over Aethermore, Alexander stood in his father's chambers, watching the royal physicians work to counteract years of slow poisoning. King Edmund was weak but conscious, and the doctors were optimistic that with proper treatment he would recover much of his strength. The king's first concern upon learning of the conspiracy was for Isabella's well-being and whether she had been harmed by the violation of her privacy. Isabella herself remained largely unaware of the full scope of what had transpired. Alexander had carefully explained that some bad people had been trying to hurt their family, but that they were now safe. The resilient child seemed to accept this explanation while being primarily concerned about whether Mr. Buttons was still safe to cuddle. The teddy bear had been thoroughly cleaned and checked, and new security measures ensured that such violations could never happen again. The political aftermath of the conspiracy's exposure was significant. Several neighboring kingdoms recalled their ambassadors and severed ties with Valdris, recognizing the threat that such sophisticated infiltration operations posed to regional stability. Ethermore's security services were completely reorganized, with new protocols and personnel to prevent future infiltrations. Evangeline disappeared into exile as promised, but not before providing intelligence that helped other kingdoms identify and eliminate Valdris agents within their own borders. The network she had been part of was systematically dismantled, dealing a severe blow to Valdris's ambitions for regional domination. In the months that followed, Alexander watched Isabella gradually return to her normal, joyful self. The trauma of the surveillance appeared to have minimal lasting impact, thanks to her father's quick action and the support of loving family and friends. She continued to sleep with Mr. Truco. Buttons, blissfully unaware of how the innocent toy had been the key to uncovering a conspiracy that threatened her future. King Edmund's recovery was slower but steady. The experience had aged him, but it had also strengthened his resolve to ensure the kingdom's security and his granddaughter's safety. Father and son worked together to implement new safeguards and policies that would protect Ethermore from future threats, while preserving the openness and trust that made their kingdom special. Alexander often reflected on the lessons learned during those dark weeks. The discovery of a hidden camera in a child's toy had revealed how innocence could be weaponized, how trust could be betrayed, and how the most basic parental instinct to protect one's child could lead to uncovering threats to an entire kingdom. Most importantly, it had shown him that vigilance and love, combined with courage and decisive action, could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy what mattered most. The kingdom of Ethermore emerged stronger from the crisis, with enhanced security, renewed unity, and a royal family more committed than ever to protecting the innocent and preserving the values that made their homeland worth defending. Isabella grew up knowing that her father would always protect her, and Alexander knew that the price of peace was eternal vigilance against those who would exploit innocence for their own dark purposes.